So we're talking about experience. Maybe the experience we're talking about is that of the self. Not just the experience we have in a good meditation or a bad meditation, or a good day or a bad day, a pleasant or a bad moment, but the central, underlying, meaningful experience. So experience means what we felt this morning at meditation, or what we might feel at midday, or might feel in the evening. It's related to that. Those are experiences. They're not unimportant. But more importantly, experience refers to that big picture, which includes yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And as St. Paul tells us about Christ, he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And this is the description of the self that we find in the Upanishads. It's continuous, pure awareness. I'm not saying they're exactly the same meaning or expressed in exactly the same way, but there's very strong and obvious connection or resonance between them. We can understand something of what the self means in the light of what we can understand about Christ. So more importantly, the big picture, the whole picture, which we cannot yet fully imagine, but which we sense is there, and as time passes, we become more conscious of it. Even as we're losing something, we gain that bigger picture, or we hope we are. Strangely enough, children seem to have the big picture sometimes with wisdom that amazes us. They seem to see the whole picture, or go right to the heart of a question without really knowing, understanding what they're doing. So perhaps we become illuminated bit by bit. And that is certainly a meaningful understanding of life, that day by day, good or bad, whatever's happening, we are making progress. Maybe not more successful, maybe not more healthy, but we are making progress in this deepest understanding of the experience, of the whole picture that contains us. And this whole picture is also the essential Christian experience. In the letter to the Romans, St. Paul has this expression, the love of God that floods our heart through the Holy Spirit he has given us. The love of God that floods the inmost heart through the Holy Spirit he has given us. And that is what Bernard Lonergan, a famous Jesuit Canadian philosopher and theologian, refers to as the essential Christian experience. The first and dominant principle in our living, he says. And he seemed, in fact, to have come to this insight experientially through his own development, his own journey, his own ups and downs in his life, towards the end of his life, when a kind of a second conversion happened in him. Or he penetrated to, like Thomas Aquinas, penetrated to an experiential level of understanding that took him beyond his intellectual work. I don't think it had quite the same effect as it had on Aquinas, who had this mystical experience while he was saying Mass one day, and never wrote another word, and said, "That's it, and everything I've written, I can't match this," more or less. So we could see the meaningfulness of life as being being an incremental, day by day, bit by bit, illumination that we're coming to see, to know, to understand, to be one with the ultimate mystery, the ultimate meaning, the purpose of life, little by little. And in that case, meditation plays a very important role. It doesn't mean that it's going to bring you to this full experience of total understanding, of total wisdom, this fullest experience of God instantaneously or within a 6-week course. But it is a practice that can be integrated into life from a young age, and that simply accompanies us in the same way as other good habits we hope that we have learned will accompany us as well. Good habits of study, of reading, good habits of eating healthy food, and a good habit of meditating every day. And that with the practice of meditation as part of our ordinary life, we are continually refreshing and repairing, maybe, our capacity for this continuous growth in understanding, in experience. So we could say then that in a very humble, simple, almost non-dramatic way, meditation opens up meaning for us and keeps us in touch with meaning. And we can talk about what meaning means, but for a friend of mine, Dr. Balfour Mount in Canada, who's spent most of his medical career working with dying patients and watching how they died, his conclusion, based on a lot of research, is that meaning basically comes down to a sense of connection. Do you feel connected? And if you don't feel connected, then life feels meaningless. Nothing really makes sense. Or you're overwhelmed by the angst, the anguish, the despair, or the sense of failure, or the sense of disappointment that comes with loneliness, with isolation. We've just appointed, some time ago, a minister for loneliness in the British government. Probably very useful at the time of Brexit to have a minister specializing in that, the anguish of isolation. But so meaning is about feeling and knowing that we are connected. What connected to what? Well, connected to anything, really. Connected to anything. Maybe anything except our superficial self. Connected to our own deeper self, but then to be connected to your own deeper self is really not easily separated from being connected to other people. And if there is a sense of connection, of basic openness or hospitality to the other in other people, then that sense of connection is going to expand even beyond you and your relationships to something more general, more conscious, more cosmic, and in between and on the way to something more social, political, more a sense of responsibility, a sense of involvement, the feeling of loneliness and disconnection in so many cultures, affluent cultures today, is connected somehow to the feeling of powerlessness, or the political process is no longer meaningful, or it's there's no point in it, or it's lost its credibility. So, experience can be seen then either in the immediate foreground of our daily lives, what happens today or this afternoon, but as well we are able to sense it, to see it as a whole picture that is constantly expanding or emerging. Rather similar to the way words change their meaning. There's the meaning of a word that as it is used today on the street or in a classroom, and that may be different, or the history of a word. You look up a good dictionary and you'll have columns and columns of showing you how that word has changed its meaning over time. And so all of those other meanings are still connected to it, even consciously or unconsciously, and you can see a kind of evolution. So you take a word like individual, comes from the Latin individuus, which it literally means, and it originally meant undivided or indivisible. That's rather different from the way we think of as the individual today, that is almost an autonomous particle, something separate. We talk about our society today being too individualistic. So the word has done a somersault of meaning, in the same way that, say, the word meditation has also somersaulted a few times and has different meanings in different religious traditions. I mean, for those trained in the Jesuit Ignatian spirituality, meditation means a reflection upon the reading of the scriptures that you do, to meditate on the scriptures. Well, in the way that the early monks, Christian monks, used the word, it meant to repeat or to chew, not so much in an intellectual, discursive way, but in much the same way that we say the mantra. We meditate the mantra. We don't meditate on the mantra or on the meaning of the mantra as a word. And that can, that shift from one meaning to another can take a long time. I was talking to somebody once who's been meditating for at least 5 years or maybe more, and they suddenly said to me, what I heard today just reminded me, you don't have to think about the meaning of the word as you say it. I said, yes, that's right. Oh, that's fantastic. What a relief. And so, however long it takes for the penny to drop, when it drops, you don't really mind. You're just glad that it has dropped. So experiences may change their meaning over time as well. Individual experiences, as I was saying, experience that at one moment or at its inception may seem totally undesirable, totally horrific even. After time, you look back, experience is still with you, it's still influencing you, still part of your story. So another chapter, but you look back and you say, now I see how that fits in. And actually, however horrible it was at the time, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. And so meaning, like words themselves, evolve and change. This is why something Father John tells us about meditation is very helpful, although a little puzzling when you first hear it. He says, when you meditate, nothing happens. But if it does, ignore it. So it's a rather Irish way of making a good point, or a bit of a koan. In other words, we're not looking for an experience in the particular time of meditation. So we should be quite content, detached, if nothing happens. It's just fairly ordinary meditation, nothing happens. At the same time, we wouldn't be doing meditation, we wouldn't be making the effort, we wouldn't be faithful to it if we didn't know at a deeper level that in fact something is happening through the meditation over time. And if something happens in a particular meditation, you have a good experience of peace, a sense of the presence, a joy that just wells up from some being in itself, or you have a time in the meditation where your mind is very clear and you can see that you had no thoughts, although saying you had no thoughts is a thought, but at least thought has been reduced to this. So that is a joyful experience, but you don't try to possess it, you don't put it in the bank, you allow it to flow, to enter the flow of experience, which builds up into the big picture. So if it does happen, if something does happen, let it go. I mean, I met people, who've had, sometimes under drugs as well. This is where drugs can be really malicious. They can have a peak experience or a very mystical experience under the influence of drugs, and but it sort of freezes them in a way, and it can either give them a tremendous sense of loss, which they try to recover in the addictive process. You're always trying to recover the first hit, the first good high that you had, or it develops some kind of spiritual superiority, and they feel, well, I've seen God, I've seen everything, and nobody else has quite seen it the way I've seen it. And so the idea of letting go of experiences is really essential to the meaning of meditation as we're describing it. The founders of the three major religions, maybe all who we identify as individual founders, is to say Moses, and Jesus, and Muhammad. Have I forgotten anyone? No, just the three, isn't it? So, and behind that, the more anonymous or unnamed masters of the other Vedic traditions. But these founders clearly passed through a profound personal experience of God that changed them. Moses on the mountain of God in Sinai, Jesus in the desert, in the Transfiguration and the cross, and Buddha, although not theistic, Buddha under the what's it called, the banyan tree. Muhammad in the cave called Hira near Mecca, where Gabriel appeared to him and dictated the Quran, part of the Quran. So, although these stories, of course, have been reshaped, but in narratives, nevertheless, there's clearly a sense that these founders, enlightened, illuminated individuals, went through a personal experience. And what did that personal experience do? It transformed them. They were not the same afterwards. But this experience was, in some sense, not directly, but in some sense was transmitted and channeled into the formation of a community that later became what we call a religion, with institution and diversity and conflict within itself. And the age of those founders seems to have passed. I mean, there are still individuals, megalomaniac individuals, who claim to have this kind of experience on this scale, and to be messiahs or world figures, but they seem to burn out very quickly, and tragically sometimes. So how does this relate to our experience, our own personal experience of meditation, and the way this experience of meditation changes the way we sense the meaning of our lives? Well, our own experience is not on this global scale, of course, like those great founders, but it is related to a tradition. It's related in the sense that we meditate within a tradition. Every time we meditate, we enter into a tradition, and not a tradition in the sense of a museum of beliefs and orthodoxies, but a tradition in the sense of something that is flowing, tradere, to something that is being passed on, that is constantly changing, like a river, always the same but never the same. Different views of tradition, of course, which relate to different points of view within a religion itself. Those who want to preserve and those who want to evolve. Finding the balance. So our own experience, day by day, and on the big scale, the bigger scale, is related to this tradition, which we trace back to that mysterious and indefinable moment in the life of the great founders. So what does our experience of meditation mean? Is it only mine? Is it only about our personal, individual transformation? Or does it have a wider significance? Well, this is where theology, thinking about this now from a Christian point of view, theology can help us get our minds straight and our attitudes sorted out to help us in the learning process, learn to meditate more effectively. In other words, the theology of prayer says it is not really my prayer in a merely personal or subjective sense, my personal individual experience that matters so much. It is the prayer of the Spirit, or the prayer of Jesus, or the mind of Christ. And so Christian prayer essentially is not my prayer or my experience of Christ, which is not your experience, but is my experience. But it isn't really that. It's my entering into that experience. That is the experience of Christ in both senses. It's what Christ experiences, and it's my experience of being in his experience, or being one with his experience. We'll come back to this tomorrow, this idea of non-duality. Not one, not two. And this is at the heart of the Gospel, certainly the Gospel of John. So this helps us, I think, quite practically to get our minds straight about what meditation might be and how we learn to meditate, and not to become over obsessed with our own personal experience. And this means we can take the attention off ourself more readily, which is what the whole purpose of meditation is, to leave self behind. So if we go into meditation monitoring every step that happens, every little nuance or experience that happens, and trying to perfect the experience or perfect the technique which will give us a higher experience, we're kind of missing the point. I mean, you may indeed develop higher levels of consciousness, but you may have lost some humanity in the process and some wisdom in the process. In the same way that in the yogic tradition, you might develop some siddhis, some higher psychic powers which are quite extraordinary. But what does it mean in the end if you can do these extraordinary things? St. Paul thought about that clearly, and that's why he said you can have all sorts of gifts, but if you don't have love, it's all a sounding, whatever it was, sounding cymbal and a clashing, what is it? Yeah, tinkling cymbal. Yeah. So it is helpful if we can learn to meditate within a tradition, a wisdom tradition, that points out some of these basic elements to us. And we don't fall into the trap of wasting a lot of time thinking of meditation merely in terms of our own subjective personal experience. And then we can make sense also and remember the meaning of St. Paul. We do not know how to pray, but the Spirit prays within us, deeper than words. Okay. This would also mean that you will never find yourself arguing with another person about the different forms of prayer and which are better. And you would not say to a charismatic or to a devotionally minded religious person, meditation will be a higher level of prayer for you if you can reach it. They may be, they may not be meditating as you think of it, but they could be much closer to oneness with the prayer of the Spirit. So that perspective on the meaning of prayer, I think, helps us get into meditation. And it's one of the big problems in the church at the moment, and the way the church relates to the spiritual climate of our time, is that this very fundamental, there's nothing particularly new about this at all, but this very fundamental understanding of prayer is not very present in the formation of the clergy or catechists or those who are teaching the young. And without that awareness, I don't think we can connect very meaningfully with the spiritual, the quite different sort of spiritual search that's going on in our time. I've noticed even already at Bonvo, we've been having young volunteers come and spend 2 or 3 weeks. And some of them, they come through a website, well, some come through the community, others come through a website, which shows you that there's this army of seekers around the world, wandering around on the internet looking for meaning, looking for places, looking for connections. And then, of course, you interview them, or you have some exchange. You make sure they know what they're coming to, and they read your description of what's happening in your place carefully. And a couple have come. We don't have much space at the moment to receive them, but a couple have come who have never meditated before, or marginally, minimally. And I was talking to one recently, and I said, what made you interested in coming here. And she said, peace. It sounded very peaceful. Now, there's a lot of construction work going on at Bombo at the moment. So I said, it's not too noisy actually, but I said, she said, no, it hasn't bothered me. She said, it is very peaceful and very happy. And now, she's encountering a rhythm of life centered around the times of meditation. She joins in the meditation. If she finds 3 a day too much, then she comes to 2, and if she only comes to 1, we don't go and knock on her door. But she's been coming, I think most of them would come to. Then there was another one, a rather more determined person who never meditated before and insisted on coming to 3. And we said, maybe 3 is a bit too much from it's like from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. And anyway, but the experience was simple enough, immediate enough, and unforced to allow them to connect to their own way of learning, to their own personality and to their own spiritual search. So firstly, there's no personal experience that is entirely subjective or isolated to the individual. As persons, as human persons, we must be conscious at some level of being communal individuals, individuous, not indivisible from the whole to which we belong, but which doesn't absorb us and destroy our individuality, but at the same time we cannot separate from. We would go crazy if we felt that we were completely individual in the sense of separated. So as persons, we are communal individuals, not isolated individuals. And so our experience, good or bad, happy or unhappy, affects others in our immediate range of influence or our degrees of consanguinity. The people in our world are affected by what's going on in us. When we first arrived in Montreal, we couldn't get the mail sent to the house, so we would go down every morning to the post office on St. Catherine Street. And I'd get there, when I went, I'd get there about 8:30 in the morning, very early. And there would be a few other people lining up. And I always hoped that I would go to one particular post office clerk rather than the other, because there was a world of difference between them. And one of them was just bubbly, happy, cheerful, and helpful. And the other one was miserable, negative, and, definitely unhelpful. So come back next week, So, I always felt the effect that they were having on the whole city of Montreal was enormous. This for a 5-minute encounter that they had with their customers was, sent you off to the day either in a good mood or a bad mood. Or checkout clerks at supermarkets, same thing. So firstly, there's no personal experience that's entirely individual. Secondly, the way we understand what our experience means depends on the tradition that we belong to. And we belong to a tradition even if we reject it. There are people who send in applications to Rome to have their baptismal certificates rescinded or to be struck from the register. But, which only shows how much involved they feel in that tradition. So the culture, it's very difficult to separate religion from culture. So we belong even if we don't participate or even if we reject it. And the way we understand our experience will depend upon that religious, cultural tradition to a large degree. In Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, Kuan Yin is the goddess of mercy, of compassion. And there are innumerable stories in popular Buddhism in those regions of Kuan Yin curing people of cancer, of saving them in road crashes, and in the Vietnamese boat people period, Kuan Yin appearing to people in the boats when they were in trouble. Rather very similar to the way that the Virgin Mary appears to Catholics. I don't think there have been any reported apparitions of Mary to members of the Southern Baptist congregations. So, and this doesn't invalidate the underlying experience, the meaning, the ultimate meaning of the experience. It doesn't mean, it's just in the head or it's just fantasy. Quite the reverse in a way. It shows there's a mystery of the communal consciousness there, of the common mind. But it doesn't invalidate that underlying experience, and that underlying experience may be universal, non-conceptual, non-imaginary, that there is no one image, no one concept or definition that can explain it. And this simply shows what theology also says, that anything we can say about God can only be by analogy. We have to use words or thoughts to speak or to express. We're in the skin of language and thought. And if we say God is good, what do we mean by the word good? Does it mean good in the sense of a good cook, or a good person who helped me out when my car broke down? Or what does it mean? So it means a little different when we apply it to God than when we apply it to a good Samaritan who helps you in the street. So we have to use these words and concepts and images in different ways. Partly the same as we would use them in ordinary language, but always different as well. So the underlying experience, some time ago I was giving a talk to some group of people, and we only had 10 minutes to meditate. So I did a short introduction, and then we meditated for 10 minutes. And it was a very silent 10 minutes. Afterwards, I was talking to some of the people, and somebody thanked me, and I said, "Had you meditated before?" And he said, "No, I haven't. And I have no words to describe what happened to me in those 10 minutes." And he didn't have any words to describe it, but I could tell, and he wasn't, used to saying something like this. He'd never had any experience like this ever before. But it was like a trapdoor had opened, and he just fallen right in to the inner room, or into the kingdom, or however you want to describe it. And he did say something like, "What do you think I should do?" So I said, "Well, I would think about meditating, but don't expect to have that experience every time you meditate." So he has been meditating ever since. And it has changed the way he works and lives. And speaking with the people he works with, because he invited me to speak to his colleagues, they came up to me afterwards and said, he's completely different since he's been meditating. So, there's an experience of falling into that inner room, and there's the experience of the ongoing transformation of his life, character, personality, and his way of relating to people. So what happens if someone has no language, no symbols, no tradition? He actually had a kind of a Christian identity somewhere in the back of his mind. And so that became reactivated and he's still reactivating it by this experience. But what happens if somebody had none of that? No language, no symbols, no tradition to make sense of such an experience? Well, I think they would still have to find meaning for it, try to express it in some way, to clothe it in some language, maybe from Star Wars, or from physics, or from neurology. They need to find some language to express it. Some meaning is necessary in order to make an experience an experience at all. Otherwise, we just flow down a fast river of day-to-day life, sensations, maybe with brief flashes of insight, but everything happening so rapidly that there is no space or time to connect with the meaning or to find a context for what is happening to you. And that characterizes life, or the way people see life, more and more today. Without this meaningful context, we easily become addicted to high peak experiences, and we're not satisfied unless we get these results and experiences that may account for some of the attraction for drugs or addictions. It makes us very impatient, which is one of the pitfalls of any spiritual journey, apart from laziness. Impatience is the other big pitfall. Or we become very egocentric about these experiences, over-subjective. And then we either sink into meaninglessness, we feel there's no truth, there's no purpose, there's no ultimate meaning. It's all just about, now. Or we become trivial, stuck on the surface of things, consuming mental junk food, celebrity consciousness, entertainment, just to distract ourselves addictively. And both of these are equally unsatisfying and stunting things. Either we're seeking high peak experiences, even at the risk of our own health, or we are we've given up on any sort of hope in meaning at all, and we just numb ourselves. What Jesus warns us against: be alert, stay awake, do not let your minds and hearts become coarsened by the worries, or today we would say the distractions of the world. So on the one hand you have Macbeth, his great soliloquy, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. So just meaningless. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. John Main says that our potential, and there's in Macbeth's vision, human existence has no potential. It's stuck in entropy, stuck in meaninglessness, running out of fuel, and then it just stops and it's over. It's just sent to the junkyard. The other point of view, that expressed by Father John, says, our potential is to respond fully to the gift of our being. Well, that one little phrase sums up a lot of our tradition. Our potential to respond fully to the gift of our being. Every one of those terms is very meaningful. And he goes on, as well as to respond to the gift of the whole of creation, and to respond not just on the surface, but at the point of origin. So, this is our potential, to respond not just to the surface flow of 24-hour entertainment or 24-hour whatever, but to go to the source, to go to the center. I think I think it's Instagram. If you put up your photograph on Instagram, it stays up on the web, on the cloud for 24 hours, and then it's deleted. It's gone forever, and you can save it, I think, but otherwise it just disappears. And you know, the phenomenon of the phone camera now is that we share every moment, every meal, to take a picture of every meal and send it to everybody in Facebook, and you know, you're waiting in line to board a plane, and the people taking pictures of the planes or the whatever. So every moment is almost of equal significance. And ultimately, that would, I think, would make you feel nothing is of any significance. If it's all of equal significance, it becomes blah, becomes boring. So, in modern culture, there is a high level of distraction, a high level of superficiality and of overload. Now, how different is that from the worldliness that the wisdom traditions have always warned us against? You know, Jesus warns us not to become preoccupied with our worries and anxieties. In the parable of the sower, some of the seed falls among the tares, whatever it is, the worries and anxieties of the world, he says, that destroy the life of the spirit. So that warning has always been there, the worldliness, the superficiality, the missing of the deeper meaning. How is that different from today? Well, maybe it's simply a difference of scale, a difference of intensity, maybe a greater risk in that it is more difficult for us to extract ourselves from it. It's not entirely different from the human condition as it has always been known, but there seems to be something worryingly dangerous about it for us anyway. So, let's end with on a more happy note. Well, I hope that's not too unhappy. And tomorrow we'll look at what we mean by the experience of meditation, and the experience of God, what that means in terms of our consciousness and of our relationship to others. This is from the same Upanishad we read. Brahmins, creatures, the universe, the gods, everything, these are the self. No one can understand the sounds of a drum without understanding both drum and drummer. That's the koan for the rest of the retreat. Actually, I have another one tomorrow, but that's wonderful, isn't it? No one can understand the sounds of a drum without understanding both drum and drummer. Nor the sounds of a conch without understanding both the conch and its blower. Nor the sounds of a veena instrument without understanding both veena and musician. As clouds of smoke arise from a fire laid with damp fuel, even so from the Supreme have issued forth all the Vedas, history, arts, sciences, poetry, aphorisms and commentaries. All these are the breath of the Supreme. And then this great description of how the experience of the self, of the Supreme, permeates everything. It's not a separate experience. That's the important thing I think we need to look at, is this experience is not separate from anything. So this is it. And this is the husband again speaking to his wife. As a lump of salt thrown in water dissolves and cannot be taken out again, though wherever we taste the water it is salty, even so, beloved, the separate self dissolves in the sea of pure consciousness, infinite and immortal. Separateness arises from identifying the self with the body, which is made up of the elements. When this physical identification dissolves, there can be no more separate self. This is what I want to tell you, beloved.